Bet the Board in conjunction with Nascar presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Furman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
Welcome in to the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production in conjunction with NASCAR. A little road racing on the docket this week as we go from the Music City and the Nashville Super Speedway to Elkhart, Wisconsin, and Road America. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by racing analyst and sports betting extraordinaire Chris Wormy. And Worm, how did you think things went for the inaugural podcast? We got to build on some of that momentum and continue to garner the support of the NASCAR betting community that seemed to put its full forces behind us last week.
Oh, I thought it was awesome. I mean, to be honest, I didn't realize how much I kind of needed this. I've enjoyed the last week so much interaction on social media, feeling accepted by the Twitter community, something I haven't done in the past. So I've really enjoyed the last, 10 days or so.
And we will only continue to build on the foundation we established. So I want to thank all of the folks within the NASCAR community and, of course, the Bet the Board family that listened in to our maiden voyage. We're going to continue to build on some of the foundations and principles we established. And as always, encourage you guys to follow Chris on Twitter. And Chris, I'll get your Twitter handle right this time. It's Chris, C-H-R-I-S, Wormy, W-E-R-M-E 15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. And then you can also follow Bet the Board Pod on Twitter for all sorts of other updates. And Chris, before we get into a recap of the race, which is typically going to be our format, we'll call it Stage 1. Stage 2 will be more betting basics and trying to explain some of the techniques and how we approach handicapping before, of course, we get into Stage 3, which is the race preview. I had a number of folks reach out to us, and I think it explains, as everyone has a little bit of a different learning curve for NASCAR, what exactly it meant when we named this podcast Stay Green. So I want to open it up to you to explain it, and I'm more than happy to fill in any gaps, as we went back and forth a ton trying to figure out exactly the naming convention we should use that would most accurately reflect what we were trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually tweeted #StayGreen with, probably 30 to go in the race. And it lasted about 10 seconds before Chris Buescher's tire fell off. So Stay Green to me, I was like, wow, this is weird. That didn't work. Stay Green to me, that's what we're trying to achieve. Whenever I'm looking at the TV or pacing mightily around the house while I watch a race, begging for the race to stay green, it's because things are going well. I don't want to see a caution. The worst thing that I can have towards the end of a race is saying, hey, I need a yellow. If I'm going to make money, I need a yellow. So the goal every week, whenever the race, goes green, the goal is to make sure that your card from, your pre-week bets to your after qualifying and practice bets and your live bets, you want everything to add up to where with the last 30 to 50 laps to go, you're saying, you know what, stay green. Everything's great. My bank account stays in the green if this race stays green. So that's why we came up with, the term Stay Green, or the name of the podcast.
And you talked about the hashtag. If people have questions that come up leading up to the race or, of course, on race day, encourage people to try and use that, circulate it through the NASCAR community, and especially amongst bettors, and we'll try and do our best to answer all those things. I know you don't want to watch your races in peace, especially when you dedicate 9.5 hours on a Sunday to watching 37 rain delays and 14 lightning delays like we were exposed to at Nashville. So that's a big part of it. And I think to your point, Chris, when you look at handicapping NASCAR, maybe more so than any other sport, it is the most susceptible to late game variance. And the reason I say that, in a football game, you have side or total and player props that can change in a moment's notice in the final 2 minutes. In NASCAR, you can have your entire racing card that looked perfect for the better part of 95% of the race go up in smoke. And I think bettors who were heavy on Martin Truex or Kyle Busch last week in head-to-head matchups, top fives like we were, or any of those other situations, were dealt an awful hand. And I think it provides the perfect segue. When you look at a way a race finishes versus how the race was run, as a bettor, how do you avoid succumbing to going, all right, this is recency bias, this was variance versus here's what I did effectively on my handicap, here's what I think I did well, and what I can build on going forward, given the caution with what I think about 8 to go, really changed the running order, albeit not for Chase Elliott, who elected to stay out, not get fresh tires, and paid dividends for him and his crew chief, Alan Gustafson.
Well, I think it's really important that you look back at the race and say, did I get lucky or was I right? Whenever you win a bet, or even lose a bet, was I lucky, unlucky, or was I right? And for those of you that had Kyle Busch in matchups or Martin Truex in top 3 or top 5 scenario, you were right. I mean, those guys finished deep in the pack, but you can't handicap what a crew chief is going to do when there's a caution on a track where tires kind of mean something with 8 to go. You just can't do it. So don't be so hard on yourself. I think that it's really important that you have a clear mind when you're making your bets. You look at everything that you think is important, and you make a decision, and you ultimately can't care about the result. Because if you do, this is going to be a really, really long season. I know that a lot of my buddies that bet this sport, that bet other sports, really struggle with the fact that, you could have a 10-second lead erased with one caution. And if a crew chief makes the wrong call, which can happen, and you end up losing your bets, they get very frustrated. Whereas if they bet an over in the Monday Night Football game, and it hits halfway through the third, they can't lose. And NASCAR is just not like that. It's also why you can't change the channel. You have to stay involved in a NASCAR race and sweat it out, or add live if you find value somewhere else.
And that's the other thing about it. And I know a lot of people go, well, the more you bet, you can eliminate variance from the equation, and those bad beats are going to even out over time. I don't want to be Debbie Downer here, but the one thing I'll say, if you've handicapped a race perfectly, the bad beats will not even out over time because you're going to have your drivers in a more advantageous position late, and you just want the race to stay green so things can play out as they normally would. But it does place such a premium on why it's important to shop around, get the best price. Don't take plus $1.60 on a top 5 when plus 220 is available. That 60 cents will pay off. And for those folks who were able to find the matchup we gave out as our best bet Sunday morning, you saw that market open up at Ross Chastain minus $1.30 to minus $1.35, close upwards of minus $1.85 in head-to-heads, and it's part of the trend that you're going to see continue. It's a significantly different bet there. And again, thoughts and prayers to anybody who faded Joey Logano across the board, because he was another one that benefited immensely from that late caution. But as far as some of the betting versus the racing that you saw, what were some of the biggest takeaways that you felt were evident, knowing this race took on a little bit of a different tenor with the extended rain delays, and whatever HMS did, specifically with the 9, they found speed on that clean track, especially as temperatures cooled down.
Yeah, I think that recapping the race is really, really important. I think it was Confucius that said an unexamined life is not worth living. So Wormfucius says an unexamined race is not worth betting. So I think we have to look at where we were right and where we were wrong. Where we were right was Ross Chastain was better than Joey Logano. For those of you that couldn't find that Chastain price, I definitely reached out on Twitter and tried to kind of supplement, hey, you know what, Ross Chastain top 5 at even money or better, it will kind of do the same as that bet. You're going to pay a little bit of a premium because I thought Logano was maybe not quite a top 8 car. So, but ultimately I thought that the people that reached out that couldn't get that matchup were able to get the top 5. So I feel good about that. The biggest surprise, I would have to say, is Kevin Harvick. I was not high on Kevin Harvick going into this race. But I'll tell you what, I saw him be aggressive and have speed in his race car consistently. This was not the guy that just kind of floated around in 12th to 15th place and then took advantage of some decent strategy or a good restart and then ended up in 7th. I mean, there was a point in this race when I said, oh my gosh, do I need to live bet Kevin Harvick? So that was, to me, kind of the biggest surprise from a driver perspective. Other surprises, I was kind of shocked at the fall off. I thought that tires wouldn't be as important as they were, which also means I was very shocked that tires didn't win the race at the end of the race. So here I am, kind of committing like, hey, I think you need tires here to win this race when there was a caution with 8 to go. And it's so funny. That lasted about 2 seconds until I saw 10 cars stayed out. And I'm like, oh, well, whoever wins this restart is going to win, whether it's Kurt Busch or Chase Elliott. It's like, it's amazing how quickly I went from thinking, oh, tires wins to, oh, tires has no chance. The only chance tires had, and I did think that this had a legit chance, was if whenever you have 10 guys with old tires and slower cars that kind of take track position by staying out, and you have super fast cars behind them with fresh tires that feel like they should be winning a race, you get super aggressive driving, and cautions breed cautions. So I thought that there was a chance that, after one lap with 3 to go when they went green, I thought that there was a chance that there would be a caution, in which case I thought that Ross Chastain was in the best place because he did work his way back up to 5th with tires. However, still row 3 on a restart, if they actually did throw the caution, I don't know that he gets there in row 3. Row 2, I think that there is a chance. But you just never know. There could have been 3 or 4 cautions. But, if it goes green, there was no one stopping those guys on the front row, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, too, when they interviewed Kurt Busch on the NBC telecast after the race, and Kurt kind of said, well, I could have been a little bit more aggressive. I have a job to do out there. But on some level, you understand the veteran savvy that comes there. If he decides he's going to go all in and overdrive a corner and nudge Chase out of the way, that could be something to come back and haunt him, knowing that he's already punched his ticket to the playoff. So you could see the maturity in a driver who knows what it takes to stay in contention, and the back and forth, the mental gymnastics, I have to imagine the 45 felt at that particular juncture, knowing that he had a top 3 finish secured, or he could have gone all or nothing. To Chase's credit, he's got 2 wins in the first 17 races this year, which equals his total victories from 2021. He now has the top spot in both the regular season standings and playoff grid. And when you look at where we're headed over the next couple weeks, 7 of his 15 career Cup victories have come on road courses. More on that later. You mentioned Ross Chastain, though, and I don't even want to talk about what we saw from the one car. Yet again, another competitive run where he showed front-running speed and a capability to win a race. There was something fascinating that I saw garner a lot of attention amongst the NASCAR community and some of the higher-profile journalists that cover the sport, specifically regarding an interview that Ross did with Parker Kligerman. Worm, I tell you, I listened to that. I texted you right away, and when I have never seen a more revealing conversation, for better or for worse, between a current driver, we know Parker drives in the Truck Series as a fill-in from time to time, and a driver where Chastain seemed like a deer in headlights with some of the questions that came from Parker, and then even Dale Jr. in the booth about his aggressive driving style and his relationship with some of the other guys in the garage.
Yeah, I was at first, I think Parker's great. I think he does a great job out there, but there's a big difference between interviewing someone who's out of the race or someone or post-race versus someone that's just, taking a lightning break. I thought it was a little aggressive. It went on for
a long time too. That thing wasn't a 30-second get in, get out, plug my sponsor. That thing went on for what felt like a legit 5 to 7 minutes, and you could tell that Ross thought, okay, this is going to be over now, and it was another question that just came hurled out of left field in his direction.
Well, then when the Parker, the guys in the booth have a question. Listen, I know that Dale Jr. is so good for the sport, and I think the world of him, but his questions carry weight. And to do that, to kind of ask the question like, hey, what are you doing about the fact that you really don't have any friends in the garage? And I don't want to paraphrase or put words in his mouth, but essentially that's what it was. Like, what are you doing to, kind of improve your relationship with other drivers? And, I didn't realize that Chastain doesn't have a hauler or not a hauler, but a
bus that he's parking there.
Yeah, a bus that he stays on, and he goes and stays at hotels. So I found that information fascinating. I just didn't think it was necessary in the middle of the race. And, I recommend listening to Justin Marks's interview with Dale on his podcast, because he kind of gets into that. And it was kind of fascinating because, Justin Marks and Denny Hamlin both have started race teams this year, or the last 2 years. And they're kind of, going through the same growing pains, yet, Denny's out there posting, hey, I'm going to, wreck him when it matters the most. So I just thought the whole thing was really fascinating. I think it's great reporting if it's not during the race. I think during the race, you got to talk about the race itself or your car or strategy looking forward. I just think that, I don't know. I thought it was a tough interview, and I thought Ross handled himself very, very well. And like I said, I'm a big fan of Parker and Dale. I just thought that was poor timing.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think it was definitely interesting because, and those guys talk about it extensively, who can stay mentally sharp during a prolonged rain delay. You don't know if it's going to last 35 minutes for Lightning or if it's going to be a couple of hours before guys get back in the car. And hey, look, I would love to hear Dale Jr. talk to Ross Chastain in a little bit more candid context. You mentioned the fact that Justin Marks went on Dale's podcast. Maybe we get a follow-up with Ross and they're able to really dig into some of that content and have a 30 to 40 minute dialogue in a slightly more relaxed manner. But I will say, NASCAR is continue to do a job showcasing some of its drivers, trying to make them marketable personalities, and knowing how good Ross Chastain has been and what Trackhouse racing has meant for the sport. Let's hope that he gets a little bit more airtime. We can see some of that personality shine through because he does provide a very different element to some of the more, and I don't mean this any sign of disrespect, the slightly more established drivers that are racing for established race teams. So I'm going to wave the green, white checker flag as we put a bow on stage one. But before we wrap things up,
can we talk about our biggest disappointment?
Oh yeah, fire away. I didn't want to cut you off.
So
we'll give you the one. We'll give you the one to go. Where we got one to go.
Give me
stage
the one to
one.
go. Yeah. So quickly, the biggest disappointment of the race was my absolute clunker of a bet that I gave out. My first ever public pick to the Stay Green fans that we have. Ricky Stenhouse. Oh, oops, that was no good. It's kind of funny. I was thinking back, I'm like, man, what went wrong there? And I'm sitting here going, man, everyone on Twitter was really high on Ricky Stenhouse. I don't think I was wrong. And I remember it goes back to something you said to me a long time ago. And I don't even know if you remember saying this, but you said anytime anytime the public is on a big dog, that dog usually has fleas. And so I'm just going to say, I guess Ricky Stenhouse had fleas because everyone thought he was this underdog that had a chance to contend, at least top 5. And I thought he was top 10. And he was barely 21st. I mean, he was never threatening the top 10. So I apologize. I guess moving forward, maybe bet half of what you'd normally bet on the pick that I give during this podcast, and then bet a full unit on what we give on race day. That would be my advice moving forward.
Yeah, I think money management is a big part of it, and it's what I wanted to get to as part of stage 2 as we continue to flesh some of this out. NASCAR, unlike betting baseball, the NFL, college football, there's a lot of things that can change from when we record this on Wednesday to how the cars unload and how some of those drivers are going to be priced going into race day on a Saturday or Sunday. And hey, look, we're going to have some that we nail early on in the week and others that just don't hit their setup the way we anticipated. To your point, I didn't think the 47 was anything close to a car that finished 16th. So I think his finishing position, not nearly indicative. But I will give him a shout out in that his paint scheme with the Velveeta, as we head to Road America this weekend, maybe a top 5 paint scheme there, but he will not be a guy, in my opinion, unless things change, that'll enter the equation as far as our dance card is concerned. And I think that was one of the things where when we went through all of it and people ask questions, when it comes to structuring a race card, we lightly touched on that a little bit in terms of positions and everything else. We know there are outrights. We know there are group bets. There's top 3s, top 5s, top 10s. There's the head-to-head matchups. And of course, different menus at a lot of the betting shops that are out there. So when you look at it and you try and begin to structure that card, suffice to say, you're taking smaller positions earlier in the week and you're willing to beef those up as you get into race day. And a lot of your matchups, I have to imagine, are coming in when the market is a lot more liquid on Saturday night into Sunday morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think early in the week, it's your chance to take a shot. And, wherever you have to anticipate where the market's going. So like I said this last podcast, very rarely am I taking someone that's like single digit odds to win, someone that's like less than, 10 to 1, very rarely, because where's the market going to go? I mean, at very best, I think the biggest favorite we've seen this year is maybe Larson plus maybe last week at like 4 to 1. I don't know. I could be wrong, but there's not a whole lot of downside risk by not betting those guys early on, right? So you want to look for the guys where the market's going to move, unless you have a very specific track where someone is really, really good. And road courses could be that type of track. In the past, they have been. This year, I just don't see that. I think that the cars are all very similar, and I have a hard time really, really developing a strong opinion about any driver before practice or qualifying. And here's why. I tend to develop a bias towards that driver. Like, oh, I've made my prediction that I think I'm just arbitrary. This has nothing to do with the race this week. Like, I like Chase Briscoe at 30-1. Well, now it's almost like I'm going to try to figure out a way to validate my opinion from earlier in the week. So I try to kind of let practice and qualifying come to me. I don't go looking for things. Like, obviously, I want to make sure that I'm aware of, previous races at that track and similar tracks that we compare and use for, potential edges when we look at these betting markets. But ultimately, it's only to take a couple numbers. And I think this week there are a couple opportunities there. But like I said, I don't think in this year especially that we've seen a car or cars that have been dominant. You just haven't. I mean, Larson at this point last year had led like 1,200 laps. He's led less than 300 at this point. So very, very different year, a different car. And because of that, I'm going to take a different approach.
Yeah, and I mean, the drivers. I mean, hell, when you listen to these guys talk, they say they don't know which car is going to be good week in, week out. We talked a little bit about the parity. Of course, we got another repeat winner with Chase Elliott grabbing the checkered flag, but still now 12 winners through 17 races, if my arithmetic is correct there. You look at some of the top 10 finishes. I mean, Ross Chastain and Chase Elliott atop the heap there. You have Kyle Busch with 11 top 10s and even Christopher Bell with 10 of those. But as far as top fives are concerned, Chastain has kind of put himself in another tier, but maybe doesn't command quite the respect from odds makers yet, as we see this week. Still finds himself as a third favorite. But unless you can bet on known commodities, and I know, hey, look, this is gambling. If we were betting on known commodities each and every race, this would be significantly easier. There has to be a method to the madness in terms of how you go about trying to approach it. And rather than overextend yourself early in the week with positions that may not hold up. I mean, the perfect illustration, you and I go back and forth. We were blown away with some of the numbers that we saw throughout the betting market as far as openers were concerned this week. And I can tell you last week, I took a small shot on Christopher Bell at 18-1 on pre-week because we thought he was going to do such a good job in terms of getting pole position that bet never really had a chance despite him ending up, inside the top 10. Never was a threat to win it. And, sometimes when you decide to throw money out there, it may not be able to create the best return. So for folks that are listening to us when we offer up our best bet on the Friday podcast of Stay Green, those positions will be a significantly decreased strength compared to some of the stuff that we'll post on Sunday. And last week, we did have the one head-to-head matchup. Hopefully going forward, as the betting board allows, there may be a couple more. There may be an outright here or there. And it's why we cannot emphasize money management enough in this sport, because you could have 2 or 3 weeks where things don't go exactly as you draw them up. You could have 1 week where you go 4-0 with your head-to-head matchups, you get an outright, you get a top 5, and suddenly your ROI for the season is completely flipped upside down. It's not like you're laying 11-10 week in, week out. When you look at Road America, and we'll get to stage 3 and, of course, the individual breakdown here, do you feel with one data point, knowing that the Cup Series is only here last year, that's better from a pre-week standpoint, or when you throw the limited track history, you throw next-gen cars into the mix, that this creates a little bit more uncertainty than you anticipated when you started to do your preliminary work?
I would say more uncertainty. I think, based on Chase's comments that he made on Monday on the Twitter Spaces, and I'll get into that once we get to stage 3, there's just so many unknowns. There's no point in getting involved too much at this point in the week, in my opinion. So I just think that you have one race here and you have a similar tire from Coda, but it's ultimately a different track. I think it's time to just say, you know what, let's just kind of see what happens in practice and qualifying and go from there.
No, it makes a ton of sense. Discretion can oftentimes be the better part of valor, not just for betting autos, but for betting every sport that's out there. And you have to know what you're working with before you want to try and put your money to work for you. There's a lot to be said about getting the best of the price, and there's a lot to be said about being confident in the wagers you're making. Stage 2, always a great time to remind all of you that may be new to NASCAR how you can watch all of the on-track events this weekend. Friday, you'll have Xfinity Series qualifying at 5:30 Eastern on USA Network. Saturday, the action will switch to the NBC Sports app and USA for Cup qualifying and practice. That'll go at 11:30 Eastern. So for those of us on the West Coast, we get to watch a little NASCAR on-track activity with our breakfast. Of course, Saturday afternoon, you're going to get the Xfinity race at 2:30 Eastern. That'll be available on USA. And then Sunday, the Cup race, the day before 4th of July. You'll have a chance to watch that at 3 Eastern on USA. And when you look at Road America, as we wave the green-white checkered for Stage 2 and get into Stage 3, we don't need a 7-minute TV break or anything like that for guys to take pit stops. We'll lay out exactly what we're trying to attack this weekend. And Road America was the first time in 60-plus years a season ago, since 1956, that they had a Cup race there. There's actually no agreement in place to come here again, but we can only hope it happens. This is a track near and dear to you and I, Worm, as we had Michael McDowell with his first Xfinity race a couple of years ago. Watched that with one of my Race Hub colleagues at, I think, Toby Keith's Bar and Grill, I want to say, at lovely Harris Casino out here. Track is located near Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. 14 turns, a little more than 4 miles long road course, classified as an FIA Grade 2 circuit. 62 laps. It's going to be divided into 3 stages. 3 stages, nothing new, but we'll go 15. Then we'll have Stage 2 will end at lap 30 and 32 laps as we run towards the checkered flag. As far as road courses are concerned, we've had 2 of them so far this season. You kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. We saw a race at COTA. It looked very different to what we saw a few weeks ago at Sonoma. How much weight do you put on what we've seen at those 2 road circuits so far and be able to apply to your handicap for our trip this weekend?
Yeah, I think it's obviously I'm going to weigh more COTA, similar tire, and I think also similar track. You know, I've never driven a race car, but I don't really know that much about cars in general, but I do know a little bit about like that. I know, shocking, right?
Hey, sometimes less is more. I mean, it's like why former football players and coaches are not exactly the best bettors, because they always think a player is going to give 110% and can't look at things from an unbiased perspective. Yeah,
so I just think that Sonoma is a more technical track. You're going to not see as high speeds there versus Road America, COTA, or a place like Watkins Glen. So I'm going to add a little bit more weight to COTA, but not much, because it was, a month and a half ago or however long ago it was. And I think that momentum is important. I don't know that they were able to learn that much, from Sonoma to now. I think that I learned a little bit from, the fact that Chris Buescher was really good, and obviously Daniel Suarez was really good. So I think that, I think that there's a lot of unknowns going to this race, and I will place a slight amount of more weight on COTA versus Sonoma, but ultimately those are just the 2 tracks I'm looking at. I'm actually not looking at last year really at all.
So we had a little bit of a unique situation last week. We had 50 minutes of practice, which gave teams a great opportunity to go out there and try multiple setups. When you look at some of the practice data that was there, you could see some teams taking 2 to 3 lap runs, mock qualifying, and really trying to dial their cars in. This week, we return more to what we've seen throughout the course of this season, 20-minute practice sessions. So teams won't have a chance to run a lot of laps. It probably allows for maybe 8 to 10 laps, slightly more if they want to try and go out there and hit it on their first run. You talked about COTA and Sonoma. The only common denominator that came from those 2 road courses, you had Trackhouse Racing, 2 for 2 so far this year. Ross Chastain comes home at 40-1 at Circuit of the Americas, and Daniel Suarez breaks through with his first ever Cup victory. And when you mentioned Sonoma, you said you don't want to place a ton of emphasis on it. We know it's a short turnaround from what we saw there. Daniel Suarez gets his first win. You talked about Chris Buescher. Kevin Harvick, one of the bigger surprises too, with a good pit stop. The 4 might have his first victory to his credit this year. But the one thing for me before we get into favorites versus the field was how poorly JGR ran more or less from start to finish. And it wasn't just one driver having bad luck. The 18, the 19, the 20, they all really struggled from start to finish there. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, if you get the feeling that they can turn things around, is there cause for concern, or should we be worried about what Joe Gibbs Racing is going to unload this weekend?
Well, I'm concerned mainly because now if you go back to Sonoma and you go to practice, the two separate sessions had very different track. So if you remember that first session that went out, everyone was slipping and sliding around and lap times were not very good. And then you had the second, once they laid down the Goodyear tire that they were using for the race, the track part started to pick up speed. But the guys that had the second part, the B session of practice, definitely had an advantage. They were much faster, but it was really, really hard to actually objectively look at lap times and figure out who was fast. However, in that second session, I thought Kyle Busch was by far the best. And I think he's a very talented road course racer. He had a ton of momentum coming in to that race. He had been, I think he's led a ton of laps recently leading up, so he had the momentum. I thought Kyle Busch was right for the win, and I know that I had him top 5, and I think I had him to win. I don't think I had him in any matchups. I don't have my card right in front of me, but I'll tell you what, damn, I looked when I got in and started listening to his radio, and he said, this doesn't even seem like the same car as yesterday. I was like, uh-oh. Like,
not exactly a great feeling as a driver or a bettor when those kind of things come across the radio.
It's like, oh no. What do you mean this isn't like the same car? How can this happen? And I don't know what it may have been. It could have been track temp. It could have been, a ton of different things that are probably over my head. But for me, is that going to happen again this week? If Kyle Busch looks great in practice, is he all of a sudden going to say, well, what is this car? This isn't what I drove yesterday. So I that does concern me because usually practice is pretty indicative of what will happen in the race. And to see that not come to fruition, and here's the thing, it wasn't that Kyle Busch was just not as good as I thought. I mean, he was trash. There's a big difference between, a race-winning car that comes in 8th and a race-winning car, or you think a race-winning car, that finishes like 27th and didn't pass anybody the whole race. That's a big difference. So I have to get past that. I think I have a little fear of betting on Kyle Busch this week, but his price is there. When I first took a look, I'm like, oh, I like Kyle. But then you actually take a deeper dive and you see that Toyotas have struggled this year on these road courses. And so I didn't jump on that Kyle Busch price. And it has me concerned as to what's going to happen after practice. Is it going to be the same car that they had in practice, or is it going to be all of a sudden this, kind of a dump truck that just rolls around in 25th?
And you mentioned Kyle, his numbers widely available, along with some of his JGR teammates, Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex, anywhere from 9-1 on the low end, upwards of 12. Like we say, and we're going to be a broken record. Shop around if you want to bet these guys either pre-week or on race day. Get the best number available. Christopher Bell, a half tick below them, and you can make the case that when it comes to road courses, while Bell's not nearly as accomplished, he's a guy that gets undervalued amongst the quartet of JGR. But, as we look at favorite versus the field here, we know that HMS has won 9 out of 13 road course races. It's largely been Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson to credit for that amount of success. Larson was spun out here last year running in the top 5. He hasn't been great at either road course to start this season. And you kind of tipped your hand a little bit, some foreshadowing of sorts earlier, talking about Chase Elliott and some of the comments he made on Twitter Spaces. I wanted you to kind of expand on that and what your takeaway was from a handicapper looking to read between the tea leaves and how you can use that to apply to building out your betting recipe this weekend.
Yeah, so at first when odds opened and I saw that Chase Elliott was 5.5 to 1, I'm like, oh my goodness. Who's setting these odds? Thinking that, maybe I was the only person that thought there was a ton of value. And how do you not fire on Chase? Just fortunate to be on Twitter and, listen to his interview where he's talking about that they had a great package and, with the other car in 2016 and 2017. And they were able to tweak it and the car responded really, really well. Well, now there's a new car and they haven't quite hit on a setup. I thought that he was going to be the best at Sonoma. Now he was good, but he wasn't as good as he's been in the past. I've never in my life, when I went back to rewatch this Road America race from last year, it kind of reminded me of Talladega Nights when the guy's like sipping tea and leading the race, he made coming from the rear look so damn easy. It was like, oh, and to start stage 3, your leader is Chase Elliott. It's like, was that even hard? I mean, it didn't even look hard to him. And I don't think that they have the same car, and he doesn't either. So as I took a deeper dive, I started to think, am I wrong by actually taking into account last year's road course races? And after hearing kind of the best road course racer for the last 3 or 4 years say, hey, this is very, very different, I decided to remove all of last year's road courses from the comparable tracks that I look at, and I'm just going off of what I have this year. Now, is that right? I hope so. I have an explanation for it.
Well, I guess we'll find out Sunday if that's correct. Clearly, our bank rules will say yes, Worm was onto something, or no, it's time to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, well, we'll find out. That's the great thing about gambling is you get feedback right away. And as long as you're able to learn as long as you have a great explanation and you can kind of objectively look at where you were right and where you were wrong, you can ultimately learn every race, and that's the goal. So I decided to remove all of those races from last year that were road courses, which I was going to take into account when capping this race. I said, you know what? I'm just going to go off of what I have seen this year. So it's just Coda and just Sonoma from this year for what I looked at.
And so if we're talking about favorites versus the field, we obviously touched on Chase a little bit. And after you tipped me off on that Twitter Spaces, I thought some of the quotes that Chase shared were pretty indicative. And, so I don't butcher it, this is verbatim from NASCAR.com. Chase, we haven't been bad at the road courses this year, but we definitely haven't gotten the car driving exactly like I want. We haven't optimized every aspect of a road race setup or a road race event, from the strategy side of it, being able to pit the car like we want to having the exact balance. Hopefully we get there, but I still think we have some work to do. And Chris, as you and I know, hope is not a great recipe for winning races, or more importantly in this context, winning bets. So I have to ask you about Kyle Larson. Fair or foul that Larson finds himself priced at 7-1, because if Chase Elliott is struggling to hit his setup, Kyle Larson has been a little bit further behind the 8 ball, and suffice to say that all of HMS isn't quite where they want to be in the road course package just yet.
Yeah, remember that we're comparing that to last year. So Larson was, in my opinion, probably the best in clean air at Sonoma. Here was the difference, is it was harder for him to move back through the pack once he decided not to flip the stage. Last year, he was able to drive right back to the front. This year, in this car, it was a little harder. So the advantage that HMS has had in the past on road courses is just smaller. So I still think that Larson is going to be really good. I just don't know that they have that clear edge over some of the other teams like Trackhouse at this point in the season when it comes to road courses.
No, and I think that's definitely worth mentioning, because if you're going to tie up your money early on, hey, look, Chase Elliott could unload and Kyle Larson could go out there and dominate the speed charts on Saturday, but until you actually see it, it's tough to try and bet into blindly. There is no doubt about that when you're talking about where these cars are now versus where they've been in the past. And I think it does open itself up for some other drivers that are worth discussing and potentially exploring as far as the way they're being priced in the market. And rather than me kind of steer you in a direction or two, who are a couple of the drivers that you think bear watching or that you have on your radar as we look towards the race this weekend?
Oh my gosh, how much time do you have? I feel like I could make a case for so many guys.
I don't think we want to be here for 2.5 hours, so I'm going to let you pick a couple of the guys and provide quick capsules on some of these guys.
Okay, so I right now I'm looking just at Bovada right now. That's what I have pulled up. I feel like I could make a case for AJ Allmendinger, Austin Cindric, Chris Bell, Daniel Suarez, not Denny Hamlin, not Ryan Blaney, not Joey Logano, Tyler Reddick. He's run up front in these road courses, and he was running up front last year, qualified well. Same with William Byron. So all of those guys have qualified well and run well on road courses. I feel like I could make a point to bet any one of those guys. Even Alex Bowman's run well. I know that as of late his finishes haven't been there. Also Chase Briscoe, anytime you're shifting a lot, he's also a pretty accomplished road course racer with stock cars, and I trust him as a driver. I think he's really mature. But I want to take a step further. I actually want to look at like Chris Buescher and Michael McDowell. I think that those guys have a lot of value at their current prices. Chris Buescher anywhere between 30 and 35 to 1, and Michael McDowell anywhere from 40 to 50 to 1. Those are the two guys that I think provide a lot of value as far as long shots right now. Here's the thing. They all, at least, I'm not talking about Chris Buescher, Michael McDowell here, this is one of his best seasons ever. And he's a great road course racer, and he's really good at Road America. He is 9th. Over the last 5 races, his average finish is 9th. Let me list some of the drivers that he's ahead of in his average finish for the last 5 races. Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin, Alex Bowman. I mean, those are Chase Elliott. I mean, that's impressive for someone in that car to kind of sneakily have a career year. And if he's going to win, it's going to be on a plate track or a road course. And if he's going to win on a road course, it's going to be this one. So those are the guys that I'm kind of looking at for just value early in the week. And they also qualified well at Sonoma. So if they can carry that kind of momentum into qualifying, you're going to see them both qualify, in the top 10 and have a chance to win this race.
One thing that I think is important to talk about, especially for folks that won't have a chance to tune in and watch this race in its entirety, who may pull up NASCAR.com and check the standings. How many of the guys out there this weekend do you feel could be racing just for points more so than a race win? Because obviously that's going to play a role in the handicapping equation and how you want to try and go about it. The reason I say that, for those folks that aren't familiar, you almost have to race on a road course backwards and try and figure out where you want to pit ahead of time, how you want to try and optimize your fuel strategy, realizing that you have to sacrifice where you're going to finish in stage 1 or 2, most likely, if you have aspirations of going out there to try and actually win this race and pick up those valuable playoff points.
I'll tell you what, if you figure this out, let me know, because I think there's a ton of value on drivers to win stage 1 and drivers to win stage 2, because I do not think you'll see guys. Listen, if you win stage 2, I think you have a really hard time to win the race. You're going to end up in, 15th to 20th place when you come off pit road. And I just don't think you'll have the time to make it up. You'd have to have an absolute spaceship. And if you look last year, Chase undercut both stages. And so he was able to pick up track position. And he just casually strolled into the lead at the start of stage 3, and no one touched him from there on out. So I think that if there is, by the way, if you hear of anyone that wants stage points, you definitely shoot me a private message at Chris Wormy 15 on Twitter, because I would love to get down on some of those bets for guys that, maybe Denny Hamlin comes out and says, hey, we're going to race for stage points here. And, well, if that's the case, you definitely want to take advantage of that in stage 1 and stage 2. Unfortunately, there's a little bit more nuance to racing, and the next thing you know, some plan goes out the window, and a random Austin Cindric wins the stage or whatever it may be. But I do think that there's some value there. I don't think that the person that wins stage 2 can win the race. I think that you definitely have to undercut that. So I think you'll see more guys get aggressive there. So maybe take a larger or a longer flyer on stage 2 than stage 1. But it is something you really have to think about. In here, for those of you that wonder why that is, it's because you won't lose a lap if you pit. So whenever you won't lose a lap when you pit, you kind of want to be the first person on pit road, because then if there's a caution that comes, you're not down a lap or you're not losing track position. So whenever you see someone hit pit road, usually everyone else will follow, and you only see it. The only oval you see, well, not oval, would be Pocono. You won't lose a lap if you're running, I don't know.
How dare you call Pocono an oval, Worm? How dare you call Pocono an oval? There we go. Much better. You completely atoned for it.
Yeah, so it's road courses or Pocono would be the only places, I think.
I'm trying to think. Do we see it have we seen it in Indy at all for the Brickyard?
Maybe Indy. You know what? Maybe Indy, you're right. I'm not 100%. It's not one of my favorite tracks to bet, so I don't pay attention to it as much. But yeah, maybe Indy might be one. But usually Indy pit road is a super, super slow pit road speed relative to the track. So I don't know. I could be wrong there. Maybe if you take fuel only, you won't go a lap down, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I think it's always worth, when we try and figure out some of the things that'll factor into making more astute wagers and knowing exactly where you are, because trust me, I have a number of folks that bet NASCAR. They don't watch the races and they immediately text you and go, why is our driver mired in 17th place? And you go, well, it depends what strategy they're on. And to your point, if our driver's grabbing the green-white checker to win stage 2, not exactly indicative of how things are going to go unless it's a unique situation. And to your point, they're able to race entirely through the field. So it's different, unique circumstances every track we go to. And I think that's part of the fun in trying to dissect a NASCAR betting card and put yourself in the best position to make money each and every week. And the other thing I'll say about that is let's hope we can have a very profitable Sunday this week, because when we shift to Atlanta next weekend and we have a plate race, Worm and I may not have as many investable opportunities, and it may be purely for entertainment purposes only. A little bit foreshadowing there. We will get to it when we get to it. But did want to give you the chance, Worm, before we kind of wave the flag on stage 3. Was there anything else you wanted to include as far as drivers you might be watching, things that we should factor into our handicapping process, or anything else that could come to fruition this weekend at Road America?
Yeah, so I'll just say I'm flat out looking at momentum, just the last 5 races. I'm looking at average start versus average finish. And I'm only looking at the 2 road courses this year when I'm at this point, until I come up with, maybe there might be new information where I'll change my mind and maybe add courses from last year. But I just think that the cars are so different based on Chase's interview that I'd rather shrink down what I'm looking at and go with momentum in the 2 races, road course races we've seen this year.
And I think next week, given the fact that it's going to be tough to really try and get into the weeds and break down Atlanta, claiming that we can find an edge, could give us the perfect opportunity to talk about some of the metrics that get widely circulated, not only through gambling Twitter, but also out there. To your point, start, race finish, green flag, average green flag speed, talk about how you factor in some of the pit stops and everything else. So I think that can be,
that'll be the fight.
Yeah,
I'll start a fight that day. Next week, I will.
We'll let you bury the hatchet. We'll let you bury the hatchet beforehand, because we do want to support, and again, want to thank all the folks. And there was a list that's too many to rattle off here for those folks that supported us in our first endeavor, and all of those that have kind of been building the foundation for what's been a very niche NASCAR betting community that I think will only grow in its reach, its amplitude, and the level of depth and understanding for a sport that I think will give people a lot of opportunity when it comes to build their bankrolls, especially during the dog days of summer. But I would be remiss, Worm, you kind of talked about, how we went a little bit off track last weekend with Ricky Stenhouse not being able to get home as more than a 2-1 underdog for a top 10 finish. But as far as a best bet, as we sit here midweek before we unload at Road America, where can our loyal Bet the Board listeners go to try and find a small position before we beef things up Sunday morning when we'll offer up the best bets on the Bet the Board website?
All right, so this week, I know I did talk about Buescher and McDowell, and I do like both of those guys. I mean, if I was going to nibble any outrights, it would probably be those 2, just because you don't need to bet very much in order to get the payoff that you're looking for. But as far as the best bet, I want to make sure we get you a winner here. And I like Daniel Suarez.
Wait, we're not always trying to get winners around here? Wait, what the hell's going on with that? What kind of way is it position things that way? Going to try and get you a winner. That's the job every single week we record this damn podcast.
Listen, Todd, listen. I'm going to give them a winner this week. And I feel so bad about, here's the thing. It wasn't even like Ricky was close. I mean, I heard a comment he made during practice. He's like, we're just not very good this week. And I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah, you can't necessarily buy back the same way.
That's so terrible to hear. But this week, I like Daniel Suarez, top 5. He's plus 215 at Barstool. I think you can get 2-1s kind of widely available. And here's why. I'm going to give you a couple of reasons. Number 1, obviously, coming off a win at Sonoma where he was really, really fast. And number 2, not only was he good at COTA, he qualifies very, very well at road courses. His average start this year is 5, and that's 3rd behind Tyler Reddick and Cole Custer, which is kind of interesting. But their average finishes are 20 and 22nd, whereas Daniel Suarez is 12.5. Now, remember, he got off to a nice lead, and I'm pretty sure he won stage 1 at COTA, and then had a little bit of an issue when he got shuffled back. That's also a danger when you win a stage. You're going to get shuffled back, lose a little track position. So I don't think Daniel Suarez will be going for stage wins. I think he's going to try to win the race this week, and that's why I think with that starting position, with the momentum that team has, and he was arguably the best car for the first third of the race at Nashville. I think that this team, he's someone I was super critical of earlier in the year. I even faded across the board in a couple races and needed him to wreck in order for me to win the bets. So I was wrong, and that's it. I'm on the Daniel Suarez train. Daniel Suarez, top 5, plus 215. Book it, and we will add hopefully another one on Sunday before the race.
Yeah, I think both you and I mean, we looked at some of the way these drivers are being priced and some of the matchups both on screen and throughout NASCAR's partnership should offer some opportunities, and maybe we'll have one, maybe we'll have a couple that we can share. Of course, our goal in all of this is to try and circulate bettable information that's widely available, but it's why we encourage all of you, our loyal listeners, especially those folks that have been with us at Bet the Board, to give yourself as many different avenues to try and explore that, because NASCAR, unlike a lot of other sports, very different betting menus from shop to shop, but as a result, you'll also see a lot more opportunity to try and bet into those numbers. All right, Worm, I want to encourage everyone to follow you on Twitter and pepper you with questions. That's at Chris Wormy, ChrisWerme. Easy for me to say 15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod with the hashtag Stay Green. Any final words of wisdom, final nuggets or tidbits you'd like to offer up before we bid our listeners a fond farewell before we reconvene same time, same place next week for you to talk about your true love of NASCAR, plate racing at Atlanta?
Very funny, Todd. Nope. All I have to say is all I want to be doing with 5 to go on Sunday is be screaming, stay green, baby. Stay green.
That's what we're talking about. So I want to thank all of you, our loyal listeners, for tuning in for our second episode, full-scale breakdown of Road America. And come Sunday afternoon, as part of your 4th of July festivities with a Daniel Suarez Top 5 ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.